Greetings. In this video we are continuing with previous video. We looked at content analysis, and in this video we are still continuing because we had not completed it thoroughly. So in this video we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of content analysis as a method of data analysis briefly, and then its uses or goals, and then we shall look at its types, that is conceptual and relational. So in this video we're going to look at conceptual in details, then relational we shall look at it in the next video. So to start with, the goals of content analysis include finding correlations and patterns in how concepts are communicated. Like, what can you achieve when you use content analysis as a method of data analysis? So one, you can find correlations and patterns in how concepts are communicated. You can understand the intentions. Secondly, understanding the intentions of an individual, group, or institution. Thirdly, identifying propaganda and bias in communication. Fourth, revealing differences in communication in different contexts. And then analyzing, last but not least, analyzing the consequences of communication content, such as the flow of information or audience responses, to list but a few. There are many other things you can achieve using this method of data analysis. So we are going to look at the advantages just briefly, because there is nothing big about it. So advantages include number one, unobtrusive data collection, transparent and replicable. That is, this type of data analysis is transparent and replicable, meaning when done well, the content analysis follows a systematic procedure that can easily be replicated by other researchers, thus yielding results with high reliability. It is highly flexible. You can conduct it anytime in any location at a low cost. All you need is just access to appropriate sources. Then disadvantages, it is reductive in the sense that since you're focusing on words or phrases in isolation, it can sometimes lead to overly reductive or disregarding context and ambiguous meaning, because you're looking at the phrase independent of the other information next and before it. Thus you may miss out on the context. Then the other one is subjective. It is subjective because it is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. Therefore there is that subjective interpretation can affect the reliability and validity of the results. Then it is time intensive. Manual coding of large volumes of text is extremely time consuming, and it can be difficult to automate effectively. So now we are going to look at the different types of data content analysis. Just to note, let's have some brief description of content analysis. One thing you need to know that is, in order for you to analyze the text using content analysis, that the text must be coded, broken down into manageable code categories for analysis. And once the text is coded into code categories, then the codes can then further be categorized into categories. Like, having got the codes, then you go to get code categories. Like, okay, let me state it like this. First, for you to use content analysis, you need to code. The text must be coded, broken down into manageable codes, that is coding. Then after that, you once the text is coded, then you can further categorize it into categories, and then from there you can even summarize the data further into subcategories if there is need. Yeah, so that is just to outline the procedures you follow when you're doing content analysis. But anyway, we want to look at the types of content analysis. So there are two general types of content analysis, that is conceptual and relational analysis. So conceptual analysis determines the existence and the frequency of concepts in a text, whereas relational analysis develops the conceptual analysis further by examining the relationship among concepts in a text. Like, each type of analysis may lead to different results, conclusions, interpretations, and meanings. So sometimes we find that relational analysis may goes further than conceptual analysis. Like conceptual analysis, when you're starting conceptual analysis, it is similar to conceptual. Like as you're starting, it is just like conceptual analysis, but the difference is that for relational analysis, you go further and look into the relationships among the concepts. So when we look at conceptual analysis as a type itself, typically people think of conceptual analysis when they think of content analysis. When you talk of content analysis, the first thing that comes to people's minds is conceptual analysis. So in conceptual analysis, a concept is chosen for examination, and the analysis involves quantifying and counting its presence. That is, if you're using the quantitative and the quantitative approach, because with content analysis we have the quantitative and then qualitative. So if you're using the quantitative approach, then you have to, having chosen having chosen the concept to examine, then you may go on to quantify and count the presence of that concept. So the main goal is to examine the occurrence of the selected items and the data. So terms may be explicit or implicit. So explicit means something that is stated clearly and in details, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. Whereas implicit means something that is suggested, though not directly expressed. Yeah, so explicit terms are very easy to identify, being that it is clearly stated and in details, like we've seen. But coding of implicit terms is more complicated, because you need to decide the level of implication and base judgments on subjectivity like for example, when we continue, we'll see it will come out clearly. But just to hope you understand this, is that when it comes to coding over when it comes to coding of implicit terms, you have to consider the level of implication. Like for example, you may consider terms like when you look at the word dangerous. Okay, take this example. We may have the word danger in our text, but then we also have the word dangerous, and then besides that we also have something like the guy seemed scary. So you find that all these things may have the same implication. So as you do your coding, you must determine the level of implication. So you decide whether the word dangerous will fall under danger, and the guy seemed scary may also fall under danger. So that's what it means when it comes to determine the level of implication. Like, you set rules on how you will handle such cases. So you need to decide the level of implication and base judgments on subjectivity. Therefore, coding of implicit terms involves using a dictionary sometimes, or contextual translational rules, or both. So to begin a conceptual content analysis, first you have to identify the research question and choose a sample or samples for analysis. So having done that, then the next step will be coding the text into manageable content categories. Like I was saying, beg your pardon, like having finished choosing the question and the sample for analysis, The next step would be coding the data into manageable content categories. So this is basically a process of selective reduction. By reducing the text to categories, the researcher can focus on codes for specific words or patterns that inform the research question. So mainly what you're doing in this process is that you're trying to 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 to, to reduce the data set into into small manageable data groups or categories, something like that. So we are going to look at so now we're going to look at the steps you can follow to do content analysis, or how to do content analysis. So actually before even you start on the analysis, you must have a clear research. You should have you need to start with a clear and direct research question. So for this procedure, we are going to have a research question like this. Let's take this question. Let's say our question is there a difference in how the Uganda media represents younger politicians compared to older ones in terms of trustworthiness? So we are looking, is there a difference in how the Ugandan media represents younger politicians compared to older politicians in terms of trustworthiness? Is there a difference? So having chosen that as our research question, when it comes to, let's say we've that is our research question. So now we are going to start our analysis. First, as we start our analysis, the first number one step is we need to select the content we will analyze. You select the content you will analyze. That is the very first step. Having got your research question, then you have to get the data you will analyze. So based on your research question, choose the text that you will analyze. You choose the text that you will analyze. Now, depending on our research question, we are looking at media representation of younger politicians compared to older politicians in terms of trustworthiness. So meaning the source of our information is media, like newspapers, things of that sort. So it is from those ones that we have to choose what we will actually analyze. So you need to decide on the following. Number one thing, the medium. Like for example, are we going to look at newspapers? Are we going to look at speeches? Are we going to look at websites? Things like that. And also need to decide, and having chosen the media, um, and so you decide the media and genre. The genre, like among media, we said we have newspapers, speeches, or websites, and then genre. Like among the genre we can have opinion pieces, political campaign speeches, or marketing copy. So having decided on the medium and genre, then we go on to decide on the criteria of inclusion. The criteria of inclusion. Like for example, let's say, okay, we've decided to take newspapers. Now, what do we base on to include a certain newspaper? Like for example, we can say we are looking for newspaper articles that mention a particular event or speech by a certain politician. Like the criteria for inclusion, if it is newspaper, then we may look at newspaper, let's say newspaper articles that mention a particular event, or speeches by a certain politician, or websites selling a specific type of product. So that those are criteria for inclusion. It can, if it is newspaper, we look at newspaper mentioning a particular event that we are interested in. If it is speeches, we are taking speeches by a certain politician. If it is a website, we look at a website selling a specific product, something like that. Then, having decided on the criteria of inclusion, then you look at the parameters in terms of date range, location, among others. Like for example, if you decide to take, like, you need to get parameters in terms of date range or location, among others. Let's say if you look at newspapers, we may decide to consider newspapers as we are looking at representation of politicians by media. We can maybe consider the previous election. The previous election in Uganda was it was this year, yes, and then the campaign started in around 2019, somewhere there. So we can consider that period of time. We can consider that period of time. So that is the parameter. So having finished considering deciding on the parameter, then if there are only a small amounts of text that meet our criteria, then we might analyze all of them. But if there is a large volume of text, then we can select a sample. Like we shall see what a sample is as we continue. But in the previous videos I gave some light about what a sample is. Now, depending on our research question, to research media representation of younger and older politicians, we can decide to analyze news articles and opinion pieces in print newspapers, let's say between 2019 and 2021, that period of time when campaigns were, when we had campaigns, when media was writing about politicians. So because this is a very large volume of content, imagine all the newspapers that were written between that period of time. There are many, so we need to choose, let's say, 3 major national newspapers and sample only maybe Monday and Friday editions. So we are setting parameters for the data we are going to use. Now, like for example, we can say, I'm not sure of the national newspapers, but just to give us an illustration, let's say we can take New Vision, we can take Daily Monitor, and let's say which other newspaper? Let's say Bukede. Now those are the 3 ones we've chosen, and then from these ones we take depending on the content or the articles on politicians in those papers, we can choose still to narrow down, to reduce on the content we have to analyze, and then we choose specific days of the week, the newspapers that were published on those particular days, something like that. So having finished with that, the first stage, which is choosing that is having finished selecting the content, we will analyze using all those considerations we've looked at. Then next step will be defining the units and the categories of analysis. You define the units and categories of analysis. That is, we need to determine the level at which we will analyze our chosen texts. This means defining the units of meaning that will be coded. For example, like we are defining the units and categories of analysis, like we determine the level of which we will analyze our chosen texts, like we've chosen in the first step. Now, the units of meaning that will be coded, so we need to define the units of meaning that we will code. So for example, are we going to record the frequency of individual words and phrases? So this is where you determine which type of analysis are you taking on. Is it a quantitative analysis? Is it a qualitative analysis? So if you're looking at frequency of individual words and phrases, then that is a quantitative analysis. Then if you look at the characteristics of people who produce or appear in the text, the presence and positioning of images, or the treatment of themes and concepts. So here you are defining the meaning, you're defining the units that we will code. And then, so having finished defining the unit, the unit, like having defined the units of meaning that we will code, then we can go on to set the categories that we will use for coding. So categories can be objective characteristics, for example, aged, that is between 30 and 40, lawyer, parent, or they can be more conceptual, for example, trustworthy, corrupt, conservative, family oriented, things like that. So those can be somehow categories. So your units of analysis, now depending on our research question which we are using for the illustration, our unit of analysis are the politicians who appear in each article and the words and phrases that are used to describe them. So here we are defining our unit of analysis, and this one is defined in relation to our research question. Remember, everything you do in analysis depends on your research question. Our research question aims to compare the representation of younger and older politicians in terms of trustworthiness by the media. So meaning our unit of analysis are the politicians who appear in each article and the words or phrases that are used to describe them. So based on our research question, we have to categorize based on age, because remember we have younger and older politicians. So meaning one of our categories is age. And then having selected age as one of our category, we are looking at this table of defining units and categories. So we've defined our unit. So we have defined our unit to be politicians who appear in newspapers, and then the characteristics used to describe them. Now that is our unit. Now we go on to the categories, and we've said age is one of the categories because we are looking at younger politicians and older politicians, meaning age is a factor in our research question. And then trustworthiness, because we want to see how the media represents them in terms of trustworthiness. So meaning trustworthiness is another category. So maybe to get more data, to get more detailed data, we can also code for other categories such as political party. We'll look at a particular politician and then his political party, and then we can also add the marital status of each politician mentioned. So now those are 4 categories. And then, since we want to see how the media represents younger politicians compared to older politicians in terms of trustworthiness, meaning we may need to use frequency to see if, let's say, we're looking at a particular phrase that is describing politicians, we compare how many times words of trustworthiness used in a phrase describing a younger politician compared to how many times the number of words related with trustworthiness are used in a phrase describing in a sentence or paragraph describing an older politician, something like that. So we can use a frequency to help us determine the more frequently words of trustworthiness are used in a particular age group, then it implies that those ones maybe the media represents them to be more trustworthy than the other group. So something like that. So meaning we can have those as our 5 categories. So okay, the other ones are the categories. Frequency may not be a category, but it is just there to help us see how frequently these terms are used with younger politicians and how frequently are they used with older politicians as a measure to help us. So in this case here we are quantifying. So here we are taking on the quantitative analysis, the quantitative content analysis. We are quantifying the words that are used. So having finished defining your units and categories, then you go on to develop the set of rules for coding. So coding involves organizing the units of meaning into previously defined categories. Like we've chosen, having got our units, then we go reading through the data set we are analyzing, and then we go on getting those units, the units of meanings that we defined previously, the units of meanings, and then we arrange them in these categories that we've selected. For example, age is a category. Now as we are reading on a particular politician, you see that he is aged 25, so we note that under the age category. Then we see a certain word of trustworthiness, we note it, you get something like that. So that is organizing those units of meaning into previously defined categories. So especially what you need to know, that especially with the more conceptual categories, it is important to clearly define the rules for what will and won't be included to ensure that all the texts are coded consistently. So we need to set rules for coding. So coding rules are especially important if multiple researchers are involved. But even if you're coding all the text by yourself, recording the rules makes your method more transparent and reliable if you have rules governing your coding process. So in considering now one of you may think that coding rules are something very abstract, but just to illustrate, for example, this is how you can set your coding rules. Let's say in considering the category younger politicians, we have to decide which titles will be coded in this category. So we are eliminating other titles and then confining ourselves to particular titles. So we will only consider those titles. So for example, we can say under younger politicians, we can consider the mayor, the councillor, let's say which other group, I don't want to go to the chairmans or the local council, whatever. They're not given that much attention in media. Or let's say maybe also the president. So you get that is just for illustration. You identify those politicians you consider under that category, and then when you come to this category of trustworthy, you need to decide which specific words or phrases related to trustworthiness will be coded in this category. Because if you don't decide which terms you will code under this category, you may find that you may even consider those words that are okay, like you may become lenient as you read through and take a certain word which may make your results, which may affect the accuracy of your results. But if you set rules and you confine this category to particular words, it means you will only be looking for those words, so it will make your results more accurate. So for example, with trustworthiness, we can take words like honest and then reliable. Honest and reliable, you can take those two words, but you can use any words that you think can work under this category. This is just for illustration purposes. So meaning, when it comes to trustworthiness, we will only be looking for those words, and then you will be noting them down and how frequently they are used to describe a particular politician or a particular politician and something like that. So then, having finished with setting the rules for coding, then we go on to the fourth step, which is coding the text according to the rules. So having finished writing down your coding rules, then you start coding the text according to those rules. So you go through each text and record all relevant data in the appropriate categories. So this can be done manually or aided with computer programs such as QSR Vivo, that is a computer program for doing such, Atlas.ti, and Diction. So those are the different computer programs you can use during this process of coding, and they can help you speed up the process of counting and categorizing words and phrases. So following your coding rules, you examine each newspaper article in your sample that you selected, and then you record the characteristics of each politician mentioned along with all the words and phrases related to trustworthiness that are used to describe them. So your coding, so you go having written your categories, you defined our units, then we set our rules for coding, then we read through the data sets that we choose, the samples that we choose, and then we go on noting down. You get something like that. We go on noting down different units under the different categories that we generated. So after doing that, we finished with the with coding the entire sample. Then the next step will be analyzing the results and drawing conclusion. That is the fifth and last step. So once coding is complete, the collected data is examined to find patterns and draw conclusions in response to your research question. So you might use statistical analysis to find correlations or trends, discuss your interpretations of what the results mean, and make inferences about the creator, context, and audience of the text. So, meaning having finished coding your data, then you go through, you examine it, you examine to find patterns, and then you draw conclusions, and then you have to discuss your results. Like as you're writing your report, or they having writing your report. Okay, let's say you have to discuss. There is that section for discussing the discussion. You have to discuss your results, and then you have to make inferences at the end. So let's say that the results reveal, according to our research question that we started with in the beginning, which was how the Ugandan media represents politicians, younger politicians, compared to older politicians in terms of trustworthiness. So, uh, saying that the results reveal that words and phrases related to trustworthiness appeared in the same sentence as an older politician more frequently than they did in the same sentence as a younger politician. So from these results, you can conclude that the national newspapers present older politicians as more trustworthy than younger politicians, and infer that this might have an effect on readers' perceptions of younger people in politics, something like that. So that is how you can handle your analysis using the content analysis method. So that's all about the content. So those steps that we've gone through, they can be used in conceptual analysis. So in the next video we shall be looking at how to do relational analysis. Thank you for watching. Hope it has been helpful. You can like, share with friends that might need it, and then subscribe to support our channel and to get more content. Thank you for watching. Be blessed.